Okay, guys, this is Northern Oklahoma College Math 1513 College Algebra using the 7th edition Hoffman Barker Nation book. Chapter 1.2, everyone's favorite, solving word problems. Okay, I'm going to work an example that'll show you how to do number 1 on your homework. The directions say, get my pen here, here's your formula. Volume equals 1/4 pi r squared h, and they want you to solve for h. Right now, the v is isolated, and they're solving for v. They just want you to reorganize everything until the h is alone, and that's called solving for h. Okay, there's a couple of ways of getting that h alone. I rewrote the equation, and remember that everything here is being multiplied. Anytime you put variables right next to each other, that implies multiplication. So to get rid of something that's being multiplied, usually we would divide. So if I wanted to get rid of that 1/4, I would usually divide by 1/4, and that's possible, but there's an easier way. Okay, an easier way, instead of dividing by 1/4, is just to multiply by the reciprocal. Multiply by 4/1. Now before I forget, I want to make sure I multiply the left side by 4 as well, because remember, whatever you do to the left side, you have to do to the right side to keep everything balanced. Now, why does this work? 4/1 times 1/4. On top, we have 4 times 1 equals 4. On bottom, we have 1 times 4 equals 4. But when you simplify that, that becomes a 1. So what we have now is 1 times pi times r squared times h. And on the left side, we have 4v. Now remember, when we're multiplying by 1, it's really not necessary to put that times 1 on there, so I'm going to leave it off. Okay, next, to get rid of everything with the h here, that's times pi and times r squared, I'm just going to undo multiplication by dividing. So let's just divide off everything we don't want, and we don't want the pi r squared there. So divide both sides by pi r squared. My pi's cancel, my r squareds cancel, my h is alone, and my final equation is 4b over pi r squared. And our h is alone, and that's what they mean by solving for h. Just get the h alone. Okay, here's an example to show you how to do problem number 3. It's a formula from business. Interest equals principal times rate times time, and they want you to solve for rate, the interest rate. Okay? All right, remember, anytime variables are right next to each other, that's multiplication. We want to get this r alone. How do we get the r alone? We get rid of the p and we get rid of the t. Now they're being multiplied, so to get rid of times p and to get rid of times t, we're just going to divide both sides by pt. Okay, what's that going to do? It's going to cancel my p, it's going to cancel my t. My r is isolated, my r is alone on the right side. And on the left, I just have interest over principal times time. And yes, the r is on the right side of the equal sign. That's okay. All right? It doesn't really matter where the r ends up as long as it's alone. Okay, our next example is a problem to show you how to do example or number 7 for your homework. It's an equation from math. It's a slope equation. Y equals y sub 1, we call this sub 1, I'll explain that in a second, plus m, that's the slope, times x minus x sub 1, and they want you to solve for m. So we're going to get the m alone. But let's talk about that little sub 1 first. Lots of people don't know what that means. What is it? It's just a name, all right? It just means your first y. We could have named y sub 1, we could have named it y sub 2, we could have named it y sub 3, and basically it just means your first y, your second y, your third y, okay? They just call it sub because the number is down low, as opposed to an exponent, which is up high. That would be y squared. Notice the difference, y sub 2 and y squared. Y squared is y times another y, but y sub 2 is just a name. That just means your second y, all right? It's different from the first y, and it's different from the third y. But when the number is down low, it's just a name. First y, second y, third y. All right, so I want to get the m alone. I wrote the m in red so we can kind of see what we're trying to get alone. So on that side of the equal sign, I want to get that m all by itself. So I need to start getting rid of stuff. Now what do I get rid of first? Do I get rid of the y first, or do I get rid of this group over here first? A good rule of thumb is get rid of what's furthest from the thing you're trying to isolate. So we're trying to isolate that m. The x minus x sub 1 is right next to the m. Think of it that way. And the y sub 1 is a little bit further away with that plus sign. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of that y sub 1 first. All right, now how do I get rid of that y sub 1? Well, think of that y sub 1 as being positive or plus. Now how do you get rid of a plus y sub 1? Well, you just minus y sub 1. Now make sure you do it to both sides. Keep everything balanced. Bring down your equal sign. Now on the left we have y minus y sub 1. Remember, those are two different y's, so we can't combine them, okay? My y sub 1's on the right, cancel. And what I have is m times x minus x sub 1. Okay, that's a good first step. We got rid of the y. Now we want to get rid of that x minus x sub 1 beside the m. Remember what's happening here. What's happening is anytime you put a variable next to a parentheses, that's multiplication. So how do we get rid of times this group here? Well, we just divide. So to undo times that group, we divide by that group. That's the easy way to do it. So divide by that group on both sides. Okay? My group on top and my group on bottom cancel out. My m is alone. And I end up with a slope formula that you guys might recognize from algebra. You subtract your y's and put it over the difference of your x's. That's rise over run. That's slope. And in construction, they call it pitch. Okay, next problem. Example for problem number 9. I'll show you how to do problem number 9. X equals y over 2 minus z. That's how I write a z, by the way. So it's got that little stitch here in the middle. And they want you to isolate z. They want you to reorganize it so that z is alone. All right, well, there's lots of ways to get that z alone. I've written the z in red. That's what we're trying to get alone. When I see an equal sign and a fraction, I like that. My first thought is proportion. Remember, a proportion is two fractions set equal to each other. Now, we have a fraction over here on the right. How do I get a fraction over here on the left? Well, I just take that x and I put it over 1, and now I have two fractions equal to each other. That's a proportion. Proportions are always really easy to solve because all you got to do is cross multiply them. So I'm going to multiply the bottom on the left times the top on the right, and the top on the left times the bottom on the right. That's cross multiplication. All right, 1 times y. That's y. Easy enough. And it's going to be equal to the other cross multiplication. Now, to make this a little clearer, I might want to group those in parentheses. So x times that group on bottom starts out looking like this. There's my z. All right, now let's clean this up. Remember, my z is what I'm trying to get alone, okay? All right, remember, if I'm trying to get the z alone, I'm going to get rid of stuff that's right beside it. Now, I usually get rid of the stuff that's further away. I have two things to get rid of. I got to get rid of the 2, and I get rid of the x. When I get rid of those two things, that z will be alone. Well, which one do I get rid of first? I usually get rid of the one that's further away from the z. And the x is a little further away from the z, so that's what I'm going to get rid of first. All right, how do I get rid of the x? Remember what's happening there. Anytime an x is right next to a parentheses, that's multiplication. So that's a times x that I have to get rid of. How do you get rid of times x? You divide by x. You undo times by dividing. Remember to do it to both sides. What do we have now? Our x's are gone. We have a 2 minus z. And since we got rid of that x, we don't need those parentheses anymore. On the left, we have y over x. All right, from this point, I'm going to show you a couple of ways to get that z alone. See, that negative in front of the z kind of throws a kink in things. So I'm going to show you a couple of ways of getting that z alone when it has a negative in front of it. Here's the first way, and probably the most obvious way, is to get rid of the 2 by the z. Now that's a positive 2, so think plus 2. How do you get rid of plus 2? You minus 2. and we're going to minus 2 from the left as well. So what do we have now? We have this fraction minus that 2, and on the right, oops, I should have put a minus 2 here, my bad. On the right, the 2's cancel out, and my negative z comes down. All right, negative z comes down. Remember, the z is what we want to get alone. So this negative is a problem. How do I get rid of that negative in front of the z? Because what I want, when I'm done, is I want just a regular old plain positive z all by itself. So how do I get rid of that negative? Probably the easiest way is just to multiply by negative 1. That will change it to a positive z. Now if I multiply the right side by negative 1, that means I have to multiply the left side by negative 1. And everybody on the left side has to be multiplied by that negative 1. So think of it as distributing that negative 1 using the distributive property. So what do I have now? Negative 1 times y over x is negative y over x. And negative 1 times negative 2, that's going to be a positive 2. And there's our answer, a little bit out of line. Okay, here's another way to get that z alone. It's not as common, but I like it because it's kind of easy to understand. Think of that as a minus z, and how do I get rid of a minus z? I add z. Now we're not trying to get rid of the z, we're basically just moving it over to the other side. And when I move it over to the other side, now I have z, and this was a positive y over x, so I'm going to think plus y over x equals 2. So basically what I did is I took that z on the right side over here, and I moved it over to the left side, and it became positive. What do I do now? Remember, I want to get the z alone, and I have a plus y over x beside it, so I minus that y over x from both sides. That gets it away from the left side. My z is alone on the left side, and what do I have on the right? I have 2 minus y over x. This could also be written as negative y over x, if you want the y over x to come first. And then that's a positive 2, so think plus 2. Either one of those is correct.